Hey guys, tonight we are diving deep into the shadowy corridors of ancient Rome, into a story so strange and so dark it feels more like a psychological thriller than a history lesson. Picture the scene. You're walking through the bustling Roman Forum, the air thick with the smell of street food and the distant roar from the Colosseum. You see the imperial procession approaching, and there, beside the most powerful man in the world, Emperor Nero, is his new wife. She is breathtakingly beautiful, draped in silks and jewels, but as they pass you catch the whispers, the sideways glances. Because everyone knows the horrifying secret, the woman beside the emperor was once a boy named Sporus. What Nero did to him is one of the most disturbing acts of psychological and physical abuse ever recorded. You probably won't survive this if you were in Sporus's shoes, a chilling reminder of how fragile life and identity could be under the whim of absolute power. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please, drop a comment below with your location and what time it is where you are. I find it incredible that we can explore these ancient haunting stories together, connected across continents and time zones by our shared curiosity. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing not in the Rome of grand monuments and epic battles, but in the far more treacherous landscape of the human heart, specifically the heart of an emperor. To understand the tragedy of Sporus, you first have to understand the man who created him, the man who would become the architect of his living nightmare. And that man is Nero. He wasn't born a monster. In fact, if you were a Roman citizen in 54 AD, you would have felt a surge of optimism. A new emperor is on the throne, a young man of just 16 named Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. He's the great-grandson of Augustus, the founder of the Roman Empire. He's handsome, charismatic, and by all accounts, brilliant. You watch as his early reign unfolds, and it feels like a golden age is dawning. He's guided by wise advisors, the stoic philosopher Seneca and the pragmatic Praetorian prefect, Burrus. Under their influence, Nero begins his rule with a series of popular reforms. He reduces taxes, which makes the common folk love him. He funds lavish public games and entertainments, the famous panem et circenses, bread and circuses that keep the masses happy and distracted. He even has a genuine passion for the arts. He sings, plays the lyre, and writes poetry. He performs in theatrical productions, something no emperor had ever done before. To the rigid conservative Roman aristocracy, this is scandalous. An emperor on stage, unthinkable. But to the people, it's delightful. He's one of them, an artist, a showman. For a few brief years, it seems like Rome has found its philosopher king, a ruler who values culture and the welfare of his people. But you, with the benefit of hindsight, can see the cracks forming beneath the gilded surface. Absolute power, you see, is a corrosive acid. It eats away at restraint, at empathy, at sanity itself, and Nero is swimming in it. He is the sole ruler of an empire that stretches from Britain to Mesopotamia, a domain of 60 million souls. There is no one to tell him no. There is no one to challenge his whims, to question his judgment, to contradict his desires. Imagine being 16 and having the world handed to you on a platter, with every sycophant and flatterer whispering in your ear that you are a living god. It's a psychological pressure cooker, and something inside Nero is beginning to warp. The paranoia starts to creep in. It's the constant, gnawing fear that comes with knowing everyone around you, from the senators in their togas to the guards outside your door. secretly covets your position. Every friendly smile could be a mask for ambition. Every compliment could be a prelude to a dagger. Then there's the isolation. He is the most powerful man in the world, but also the loneliest. He can never have a true friend, only subjects. He can never have an honest conversation, only an audience. Or maybe, just maybe, the breaking point comes with the woman he believes he loves more than life itself. Her name is Poppaea Sabina, and she is a masterpiece of Roman womanhood. You see her for the first time at a lavish banquet in the imperial palace. The air is heavy with the scent of exotic perfumes and roasting meats. Senators and their wives recline on couches, their jewels glittering in the flickering lamplight. And then she enters. The room seems to fall silent. Poppaea is not just beautiful, she is devastatingly so. Ancient historians, who are by no means her fans, grudgingly admit her extraordinary allure. She is described as having hair like spun gold and skin as pale as milk. But it's not just her physical beauty. She carries herself with an air of supreme confidence, a captivating blend of intelligence and ambition. She is everything Nero thinks he wants in a woman, everything he needs in an empress. But Poppaea is more than just a pretty face to hang jewels on. She possesses a razor-sharp political mind, making her a formidable ally or a terrifying enemy. She understands the intricate dance of power in the imperial court better than anyone. When Nero first lays eyes on her, he is already a married man. His wife is Claudia Octavia, the daughter of the previous emperor, Claudius. Theirs was a cold, loveless union, a political arrangement designed to secure Nero's claim to the throne. Octavia is quiet, pious and reserved, the model of a traditional Roman matron. Poppaea is her polar opposite. Where Octavia is demure, Poppaea is vivacious and commanding. Where Octavia shuns the spotlight, Poppaea revels in being the center of everyone's gaze. She is famous for her elaborate beauty routines, including bathing in the milk of 500 donkeys to keep her skin soft, a quirky tidbit that speaks volumes about her dedication to maintaining her most powerful asset. The affair between Nero and Poppaea begins as a typical Roman scandal, the kind of gossip that fuels dinner parties across the city. But you can see it's different. What starts as illicit passion quickly morphs into something far more dangerous, a genuine, all-consuming obsession. Nero isn't just attracted to Poppaea's beauty, he is utterly consumed by her. His fixation terrifies even his closest advisors, men like Seneca, who have seen the dark side of imperial power before. You witness Nero's behavior become increasingly erratic and possessive. At public functions, he flies into murderous rages if he catches another man looking at Poppaea for a moment too long. He begins to station his personal German bodyguards around her at all times, ostensibly for her protection, but in reality to monitor her every move, her every conversation. He lavishes her with gifts that strain the imperial treasury. He imports jewels from the farthest reaches of India, silks from the distant land of China, and rare perfumes from Arabia. He is trying to buy her, to own her, to bind her to him with a chain of gold and gems. But perhaps the most telling sign of his obsession is how he begins to bend reality itself to fit his fantasy. First, he divorces Octavia. This is a shocking move that alienates many of his traditional supporters in the Senate. To them, Octavia represents stability and legitimacy. Divorcing her is a slap in the face to the old guard. But Nero doesn't care. He then announces his intention to marry Poppaea in a full imperial ceremony. The wedding is a spectacle of unprecedented luxury. Nero spares no expense, determined to show the world the depth of his devotion. The city is treated to days of festivals and games, all in honor of the new empress. Yet, even marriage cannot satisfy Nero's desperate need to possess Poppaea completely. You watch as he systematically isolates her from her family and friends. He surrounds her with a new circle of people who owe their positions, their wealth, their very lives, entirely to his favor. They are his creatures, and their only job is to reinforce the emperor's reality. He commissions dozens of portraits and sculptures of her. They are not just for public display in forums and temples. He fills his private chambers with her image, so that he can gaze upon her face even when they are apart. Ancient sources, like the historian Tacitus, tell us that Nero would sometimes spend hours just watching Poppaea as she went about her day, observing her as she read or bathed or spoke with her attendants. This isn't the tender gaze of a loving husband. It is the watchful, predatory stare of a man who has confused love with ownership, who sees another human being not as an independent person with her own thoughts and feelings, but as a beautiful, precious object that exists solely for his pleasure. Poppaea, for her part, seems to understand the perilous game she is playing. You can see the intelligence in her eyes. She is smart enough to recognize that her beauty, combined with Nero's obsession, has given her a level of power unprecedented for a Roman woman. But she is also shrewd enough to realize that this power is built on a foundation of sand. It depends entirely on the whims of an increasingly unstable man. So she uses her influence carefully. She advances the careers of her family members, building a network of allies who will protect her if Nero's affections should ever waver. She is playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. But Poppaea has one fatal flaw, one that will ultimately seal her doom. She is not afraid to stand up to Nero. Unlike every other person in the imperial court who has learned to walk on eggshells to anticipate the emperor's moods and placate his ego, Poppaea retains her independent spirit. She argues with him about matters of state policy. She critiques his artistic pursuits, his poetry, his lyre playing. She even mocks his public performances when she thinks they are subpar. Perhaps she believes her hold on him is so absolute that she is immune to his rages. Or perhaps, after years of living in the gilded cage he built for her, she is simply tired of playing the part of the perfect, adoring wife. The year is 65 AD. The air in Rome is thick with tension. Nero's reign has taken a darker turn. Plots against him, real and imagined, have led to a series of brutal purges. Senators are forced to commit suicide, their property confiscated by the state. The Great Fire of 64 AD has devastated the city, and rumors swirl that Nero himself started it so he could build a lavish new palace, the Domus Aurea, or Golden House. To deflect blame, Nero scapegoats a small, obscure religious sect known as the Christians, subjecting them to horrific public tortures. This is the atmosphere in which Poppaea lives, an atmosphere of fear, paranoia, and unchecked violence. The details of what happened on that fateful day vary depending on which ancient historian you read, Tacitus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, but the tragic outcome is always the same. It begins as a simple domestic argument, the kind of squabble that happens in any marriage. Some sources say it was about Nero coming home late from the chariot races at the Circus Maximus. Others claim it was about his obsession with his theatrical pursuits, his endless rehearsals and performances. Poppaea is pregnant at the time, carrying what would have been their second child. Perhaps the stress of the pregnancy, combined with the oppressive political climate, makes her less willing to tolerate Nero's increasingly erratic behavior. According to the most widely accepted account, from the historian Tacitus, the argument escalates. Poppaea dares to criticize Nero's priorities. She suggests he cares more about his public image, his adoring crowds, and his artistic hobbies than he does about his responsibilities as a husband, a father, and an emperor. For a man like Nero, a man whose ego has been inflated to godlike proportions, this is an unforgivable insult. It strikes at the very core of his identity. What happens next has been debated by historians for centuries, but the consensus is chilling. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, a sudden, violent storm of fury, Nero either kicks or strikes his pregnant wife with such brutal force that she suffers catastrophic internal injuries. Some sources suggest it was a single, vicious blow to her abdomen. Others describe a more sustained attack, a flurry of kicks and punches that leaves her bleeding and unconscious on the cold marble floor of their chambers. Imagine that moment. The red mist of rage clears from Nero's eyes. He looks down at what he has done. The man who commands 30 legions, the man who can order the execution of any person in the empire with a single word, the man who is worshipped as a living god in the eastern provinces, has just destroyed the one thing in the world he actually cared about. The woman he had obsessed over, the woman for whom he had divorced his first wife and alienated the Senate, the woman whose image filled his palace and his mind, is now dying at his feet because of his own uncontrolled childish violence. The scene that follows, as described by ancient sources, is one of the most pathetic and horrifying in the annals of imperial history. Nero reportedly throws himself onto Poppeia's broken body. He is a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. He begs her for forgiveness, his words choked with sobs. In the next breath, he commands her to live, as if his imperial authority, his divine will, could extend even over the laws of life and death. He screams for the best physicians in Rome. He offers them fortunes, entire estates if they can save her. He threatens them with the most gruesome tortures if they fail. But it is too late. The damage is too severe. Poppaea Sabina, Empress of Rome, dies within hours, taking with her the unborn child who might have been Nero's heir. In that moment, something fundamental and irreparable breaks inside the emperor's mind. The grief that follows is not the healthy, sorrowful process of mourning. It is a complete and terrifying break with reality. Nero's mourning becomes the stuff of legend, a city-wide performance of sorrow. He refuses to have Poppeia's body cremated according to traditional Roman custom. The burning of the body on a funeral pyre was seen as a way to release the soul. Instead, Nero insists on having her body embalmed, an Egyptian practice that was foreign and unsettling to Romans. He wants to preserve her physical form, to keep her with him. He entombs her in the mausoleum of Augustus, a tomb reserved for the greatest emperors and their families, a place far more elaborate and prestigious than those of previous empresses. He then takes the unprecedented step of declaring her a goddess. He establishes a religious cult in her honor, with its own priests and temples. This was not entirely unusual. Members of the imperial family were often deified after death, but the fervor with which Nero pursues it is. He delivers a long, rambling eulogy at her public funeral, weeping uncontrollably as he extols her virtues, her beauty, her divine nature. He spends days, weeks, locked in his chambers, talking to her embalmed corpse as if she could still hear him, as if their conversations could continue. The imperial court is now forced to navigate an even more treacherous and surreal landscape. Courtiers are expected to participate in the emperor's delusion. They must speak of Poppaea in the present tense, as if she were merely in the next room. They must leave her favorite seat empty at banquets. They must offer prayers to her new cult with convincing piety. Anyone who dares to suggest that the emperor should move on, that he should perhaps consider remarrying for the sake of the empire's stability, is immediately exiled, or worse, forced to commit suicide. The entire Roman elite is held hostage by one man's grief-stricken madness. It is during this dark, bizarre period of imperial mourning that a young man named Sporus first enters Nero's line of sight. He has no idea, of course, that he is about to walk into a waking nightmare, that his life is about to be stolen from him in the most profound way imaginable. You see Sporus for the first time through Nero's eyes. He is probably around 14 or 15 years old. He was born into slavery within the vast imperial household, a sprawling network of thousands of slaves and freedmen who keep the palaces running. He was likely freed as a child, a common practice for promising young slaves, and given an education that prepared him for a career in the imperial administration. This was actually a position of relative privilege. Freedmen in the emperor's service often enjoyed a standard of living far better than that of freeborn Roman citizens of the lower classes. They had access to good food, comfortable lodging, and the possibility of accumulating significant wealth and influence. But this privilege came at a steep price, complete and utter dependence on the emperor's favor. A freedman owed everything, his freedom, his job, his status, to the generosity of his former master. This created a relationship of absolute vulnerability. They could be elevated to positions of great power, but they could also be discarded, punished, or killed on a whim, with no legal recourse. What makes Sporus special in Nero's grief-addled eyes is not his intelligence, his administrative skills, or his personality. It is his face. Multiple ancient sources, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, Aurelius Victor, all agree on this one crucial point. The young man bore an uncanny, almost supernatural resemblance to the dead empress, Poppaea Sabina. Perhaps it was the shape of his eyes, the delicate line of his jaw, his bone structure. In a world where Romans, like many ancient peoples, believed that physical resemblance could indicate a deeper spiritual connection, this similarity would have seemed like a sign, a miracle. The first time Nero sees Sporus after Poppaea's death, something clicks, or rather, snaps, in the emperor's broken mind. He is not just reminded of his dead wife. For a fleeting, insane moment, he may have actually believed he was seeing her ghost. Her spirit returned to him in a new form. Here, in this young man, is a chance to undo the irreversible, to bring back what his own violent hands had destroyed. The resemblance is so striking, so perfect, that it feeds directly into his delusion. Of course, there is one glaring, obvious problem. Sporus is a boy. He is male. But for a man who has already convinced himself that he is a living god, for a man who has spent months talking to a corpse and forcing his entire court to pretend she is still alive, changing a person's gender seems like a minor logistical obstacle. It is a problem to be solved with the same ruthless application of power he uses to solve all his other problems. What happens next represents one of the most calculated and systematic acts of cruelty in human history. Nero doesn't just decide to force Sporus to dress as a woman. That would have been strange enough for the Romans, but not entirely unheard of in the decadent fringes of the aristocracy. No, Nero decides to make the transformation permanent, to remake Sporus, body and soul, into a perfect replica of Poppaea. He summons the best physicians in Rome, the same men he had threatened to torture when they failed to save Poppaea. He gives them a new, horrific order. They are to perform a castration on the young man. But this isn't the typical castration performed on slaves destined to be eunuch servants. Historians still argue whether the procedure was a full orchiectomy or something more, a series of surgeries designed not just to remove his masculinity, but to make him appear more feminine. The goal is not just to render him sterile and docile, It is to physically erase his male identity. This is not medicine, it is mutilation. It is the systematic destruction of Sporus's identity as a human being, a project of psychological and physical demolition. You can only imagine the terror that must have gripped Sporus. He is a teenager, a freedman with no power, no rights, no one to protect him. He is summoned to the Emperor's presence, a man known for his violent, unpredictable rages. He is told that his body is going to be irrevocably altered, that a fundamental part of his being is going to be carved away, all to satisfy the grotesque fantasy of a grieving madman. He has no choice. To refuse would mean immediate, certain, and probably excruciating death. The procedure itself would have been terrifying. It was dangerous, excruciatingly painful, and irreversible. In an age before modern anesthetics and antibiotics, such a surgery carried a high risk of death from infection or blood loss. But even if Sporus survived the physical ordeal, he would be forever changed, physically, emotionally, and socially. He would never be able to father children. He would never experience a normal relationship. In the deeply patriarchal Roman society, he would not even be considered fully male anymore. He would become a eunuchus, a third gender, regarded with a mixture of pity, contempt, and suspicion. The surgery takes place in the secrecy of the imperial palace, in chambers specifically prepared for the purpose. You can almost hear the echoes of his screams down the marble corridors, screams that would have fallen on deaf ears. He would have been held down by imperial guards, while the physicians, their faces grim, approached with their scalpels and knives. He knows that his life, as he knew it, is over. He is being unmade. The recovery would have been a long and agonizing process, taking weeks or even months. He would have had to endure constant pain, the risk of infection, and the profound psychological trauma of what had been done to him. But Nero is patient. He is waiting for his creation to heal. He is waiting for his new Poppaea to be ready. Once Sporus has recovered enough to be presented, Nero announces something that shocks even the jaded, seen-it-all Roman aristocracy. He is going to marry the young man. Not in a private ceremony, not as a strange personal quirk, but in a full, public imperial wedding ceremony, with all the rites and rituals befitting an emperor and his empress. The preparations for this macabre wedding take months and consume enormous resources. Sporus is given a new name. He is to be called Sabina, after the dead empress. He is moved into a special suite of rooms in the palace, the very rooms that once belonged to Poppaea. Here, his transformation from Sporus the freedman to Sabina the empress begins in earnest. A team of imperial seamstresses is assigned to him. Their task is to create an entire new wardrobe, a collection of gowns or stoli, designed to flatter his surgically modified physique and hide any remaining traces of masculinity. They use the finest silks, the most delicate linens, the most intricate embroidery. Master jewelers are commissioned to craft new ornaments for him: necklaces, bracelets, earrings, and hairpins. Many of these pieces incorporate gems and pearls that had once belonged to the real Poppaea, tangible links to the dead woman he is being forced to replace. Each piece of jewelry is not just an accessory, it is a shackle, binding him to a role he never chose. Makeup artists are brought in to teach him the art of cosmetic enhancement. They show him how to use kohl to line his eyes, making them appear larger and more expressive. They teach him how to apply rouge, made from red ochre or wine dregs, to give his cheeks a soft, rosy glow. They show him how to use powders, made from ground chalk or lead, to soften the angles of his face and create the illusion of a flawless, pale complexion. These daily lessons are not just about appearance. They are exercises in the systematic erasure of his original identity. Every time he looks in a polished bronze mirror, he sees his own face being painted over, transformed into a mask. Hairdressers instruct him in the elaborate styling techniques that were fashionable among aristocratic Roman women. His hair is allowed to grow long, then it is curled, braided, and arranged in complex, towering styles, often incorporating false hairpieces and expensive ornaments. The process could take hours every single day, requiring the assistance of multiple servants and the use of heated metal tongs called calamistrum. But perhaps the most psychologically damaging part of his RE education are the lessons in feminine behavior and deportment. He is assigned tutors, probably older, experienced women from the court, who teach him how to walk, how to sit, how to gesture in a way that is considered appropriately ladylike. He learns how to hold his hands delicately, how to position his feet when he stands, how to arrange the folds of his stola when he sits. He learns how to move through a room with a gentle, gliding motion, conveying grace and modesty rather than masculine strength and purpose. Voice coaches work with him to modify his speech patterns. He is taught to speak in a higher pitch, to soften his tone, to adopt the linguistic mannerisms and turns of phrase associated with feminine discourse. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of his transformation, as vocal patterns are deeply ingrained and incredibly difficult to change consciously. Every word he speaks becomes a performance. Can you even begin to imagine the psychological torture of this process? Every single day, Sporus is forced to participate in his own unmaking. Every morning, he wakes up in rooms decorated to remind him of a dead woman he never met. Every glance in the mirror reflects back a stranger wearing his face. Every lesson in how to walk, talk, and act like a woman is a reminder that his true self, the boy named Sporus, is being systematically buried, layer by layer, under the persona of Sabina. Every piece of jewelry that had once adorned a dead empress is now a cold, heavy weight on his skin, a constant physical reminder of the ghost he is being forced to embody. He is living in a prison made of silk and gold, a psychological cage from which there is no escape. He is Nero's masterpiece, a living statue carved from human flesh, a testament to the terrifying power of an emperor to whom nothing, not even the fundamental identity of another human being, is sacred. The boy named Sporus is gone, and in his place stands a beautiful tragic doll, waiting for her wedding day. You are standing in the heart of the Roman world, a silent observer to a spectacle that defies belief. The air in the grand hall of the Domus Aurea, Nero's golden house, is thick with the scent of thousands of oil lamps, their flickering light dancing off gilded ceilings and intricate mosaics. Musicians, hidden behind marble columns, play the soft, traditional melodies of a Roman wedding. The most powerful men and women of the empire are gathered here. Their faces a carefully composed mask of polite interest, their eyes betraying a mixture of morbid curiosity and fear. They are here to witness the unthinkable. The wedding is scheduled for the spring of 67 AD, timed to coincide with major religious festivals, a move by Nero to lend ceremonial weight and divine approval to his actions. He is treating this not as a private whim but as a legitimate imperial union, an event of state worthy of the greatest emperor in Roman history. And then the procession begins. At the head of it is Nero himself, dressed in a toga of imperial purple, a laurel wreath on his head. But it is the figure beside him that draws every eye in the room. It is Sporus, or as he is now known to the world, Sabina. You see him glide forward, his movements practiced, graceful, a perfect imitation of a high-born Roman bride. He is dressed in a tunica recta, the traditional white wedding tunic, and veiled with the flammeum, a flame-colored veil that obscures his features, adding to the mystique and the horror of the moment. His hair, painstakingly styled, is arranged in the 6 traditional braids of a Roman bride, the senicrines. He looks from a distance like the perfect imperial bride, but everyone here knows the truth. They know the soft-faced youth beneath the veil. They know what was done to him. The ceremony proceeds with a chilling adherence to tradition. The couple stands before the Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, a position held by Nero himself, adding another layer of surrealism to the event. They go through all the ancient Roman rituals. They exchange vows. They join their right hands in the dextrarum iunctio, a symbol of their union in faith and trust. They share a piece of sacred spelt cake, the farium, in a rite known as confuriatio, the most traditional and binding form of Roman marriage, reserved for the oldest patrician families. A legal marriage contract, the tabulae nuptiales, is signed and witnessed, making this union, in the eyes of the law as dictated by the emperor, official. The guests, playing their parts with the accomplished skill of actors who know their lives depend on a convincing performance, offer their congratulations. They shout the traditional wedding cry, Talasio. They present expensive gifts. But the atmosphere is thick with an unspoken tension, a nervous energy that comes from participating in something so fundamentally, profoundly wrong. You are witnessing the ultimate expression of absolute power, the power to declare fiction to be fact, to force an entire society to accept a lie. Following the wedding, Nero's treatment of Sporus solidifies the terrifying delusion. He is not treated as a favorite, a pet, or a concubine. He is treated, in every public and private respect, as the legitimate empress of Rome. Sporus, now Sabina, is given his own household staff, a retinue of servants, ladies-in-waiting, and guards. He is assigned his own magnificent suite of apartments within the palace complex. He is granted a substantial income from the imperial treasury, giving him the means to live in unimaginable luxury. He has his own curtained litter for traveling through the streets of Rome, his own stable of horses for riding, and his own entourage of sycophants and supporters who flock to the new empress, eager to gain favor with the emperor. But all this apparent luxury, this gilded cage, comes with a terrible soul-crushing price, the complete and final erasure of his original identity and the constant high-stakes performance of a psychologically devastating role. Sporus is now expected to accompany Nero to all public functions. You see him sitting beside the emperor at the gladiatorial games in the amphitheater, his face a pale, beautiful mask of composure as men and beasts die on the sand below. You see him reclining next to Nero at lavish state dinners, picking delicately at his food, participating in stilted conversations with senators and foreign dignitaries who struggle to maintain their composure. He must play the part of the devoted wife in every single interaction. And this isn't just about public appearances. You come to understand that Nero genuinely seems to believe he has succeeded in resurrecting Poppaea. In the privacy of their chambers, he calls Sporus by his dead wife's name. He reminisces with him about shared memories that never happened, about moments from his marriage to the real Poppaea. He expects Sporus to respond as if he too remembers these events. Do you remember that time in Baiae, my love, when we watched the dolphins from our villa? He might ask. And Sporus, his heart pounding with fear, must play along. He must smile and nod, and perhaps invent a small detail to make the memory more convincing. Yes, my lord, he might whisper, his voice trained to a higher pitch. The sun was so beautiful on the water that day. For Sporus, every day becomes a tightrope walk over a chasm of imperial rage. The slightest mistake, a forgotten detail, a moment of hesitation, a flicker of his true self in his eyes, could mean a violent outburst or worse. He has to remember not just how to look and act like a woman, but how to think and react as if he were Poppaea herself. He must become a method actor in the most terrifying role ever conceived, a role from which he can never step away. Ancient sources, like Cassius Dio, describe Sporus as becoming increasingly adept at this horrifying deception. He develops an almost supernatural ability to anticipate Nero's moods, to say the right thing at the right time, to soothe the emperor's volatile temper. He becomes a master of the subtle art of survival. But these same historians also note that he grows more withdrawn, more melancholic as time passes. Though he continues to play his assigned role with flawless perfection in public, the psychological strain is almost impossible to comprehend. Imagine his inner world. Every morning, Sporus wakes in a bed draped with Egyptian linen, in rooms decorated with frescoes and mosaics designed to please a dead woman he had never met. Every mirror, made of highly polished bronze or silver, reflects back an image that is both his and not his features, but painted, coiffed, and adorned into the mask of Sabina. Every conversation requires him to actively suppress his own thoughts, his own memories, and to access a fictional set of experiences that belong to someone else. He is a ghost inhabiting his own body. The sensory details of his life are a constant reminder of his imprisonment, the feel of the heavy silk of the stola against his skin, a garment designed for a woman's body, the scent of the nard and myrrh perfumes he is required to wear, the same scents Poppaea favored, the weight of the pearl earrings pulling at his earlobes, the discomfort of the tight leather corsets sometimes worn under the gowns to create a more feminine silhouette, the endless hours spent sitting still while slaves arrange his hair. Each sensation is a nail in the coffin of his former self. You can imagine the small, private moments of terror. A courtier, perhaps forgetting the script for a moment, accidentally addresses him with a male pronoun. The room falls silent. All eyes dart to Nero. Will the emperor notice? Will he fly into a rage? Sporus would have to be the one to smooth it over, perhaps with a light feminine laugh, to diffuse the tension and save the courtier's life, all while his own heart is hammering against his ribs. Or consider the sheer mental exhaustion. After a long day of public appearances and private performances of being Sabina, he would retire to his chambers, and for a few brief moments, alone, he might be able to let the mask drop. What would he see in the mirror then? Would he even recognize the boy named Sporus anymore? Or has the performance consumed the performer? Historians still argue whether Sporus ever found a way to privately resist his fate, or if he completely succumbed to the role for survival. This bizarre, tragic existence continues for over 2 years. Sporus lives as Nero's empress, a living doll, a constant companion to the emperor's madness. And then, his ordeal reaches a new international height. Nero, who fancies himself the greatest artist in the world, decides to embark on a grand tour of Greece in late 66 AD. For centuries, Rome had been the military and political master of Greece, but Romans always felt a certain cultural inferiority to the Greeks, the originators of philosophy, drama, and the arts. Nero is determined to change that. He will go to Greece and compete in their most prestigious artistic and athletic festivals, the Olympic, Pythian, Nemean, and Isthmian Games. He believes his talents as a singer, a lyre player, and a tragic actor will finally be properly appreciated by the culturally sophisticated Greeks. Naturally, Sporus must accompany him, displayed to the world as the Empress of Rome. The imperial entourage that travels to Greece is enormous, a mobile city of courtiers, guards, slaves, and entertainers. and at its center are Nero and his bride. Imagine the scene as they arrive in Corinth or Athens. The local Greek aristocrats and officials, subjects of the Roman Empire, come out to greet their conqueror. They are prepared for the usual displays of Roman power and arrogance, but they are not prepared for this. They see their emperor, the most powerful man on earth, traveling with a surgically altered teenage boy dressed as a woman whom he calls his wife. And they are expected to play along. They must address Sporus as Augusta Empress. They must offer him the same deference and honors they would offer a true empress. You can see the confusion and disbelief in their eyes. The Greeks were no strangers to same-sex relationships, but this was something else entirely. This wasn't a relationship, it was a public performance of a delusion enforced by the sword. It was a display of power so absolute it could command reality itself. For Nero, this was the ultimate triumph. He was not only winning prizes in their games, prizes that were, of course, fixed in his favor, but he was also forcing the cradle of Western civilization to participate in his personal bizarre fantasy. For Sporus, it must have been a new level of humiliation, being paraded not just before the Roman court, but before the entire civilized world, a living monument to Nero's insanity. While Nero is in Greece competing in festivals and collecting trophies, the situation back in Rome is deteriorating rapidly. His neglect of state affairs, his extravagant spending on his artistic tour, and his continued persecution of the senatorial class have pushed the Roman establishment to its breaking point. The empire is a ship without a captain, sailing into a storm. Rebellions begin to flare up in the provinces. In Gaul, a governor named Gaius Julius Vindex raises his legions against the emperor, denouncing him as a tyrant and a disgrace. In Spain, another governor, Servius Sulpicius Galba, follows suit, declaring his own intention to march on Rome and claim the throne. Word of the revolts reaches Nero in Greece. At first, he dismisses them. He is a god, an artist. How dare these petty generals interrupt his triumphs? But the news gets worse. The Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers stationed in Rome who were supposed to be the emperor's personal protectors, switch their allegiance. Their prefect, Nymphidius Sabinus, promises them a huge bonus if they abandon Nero and support Galba. This is the fatal blow. Without the loyalty of the Praetorians, Nero has no power in the capital. The Senate, which had lived in fear of Nero for years, finally finds its courage. They declare Nero an enemy of the state, the hostis publicus, and sentence him to death by flogging. When Nero finally understands the gravity of the situation, he panics. He rushes back to Italy in early 68 AD, his artistic tour cut short. His return to Rome is not the triumphant procession of a conquering hero, but the desperate scramble of a hunted man. He finds the city turned against him. His statues are being torn down. His name is being cursed in the streets. He is forced to flee the palace in the middle of the night, disguised as a commoner. And who is with him in this final, desperate flight? A small group of his most loyal freedmen and Sporus. Even as his world collapses, even as he faces certain death, Nero cannot bear to leave behind his living, breathing reminder of Poppaea. You see them huddled together, a pathetic little group, making their way to a villa owned by one of Nero's freedmen a few miles outside the city. Here they hide, waiting for either a miraculous rescue or the inevitable capture. Nero's final hours are a tragicomic spectacle of indecision and theatricality. He alternates between drafting grandiose escape plans, sailing to Egypt, throwing himself on the mercy of the Parthians, and preparing for his suicide. He orders a grave to be dug to his exact measurements. He weeps and laments the loss the world will suffer. Qualis artifex pereo. He cries, "What an artist dies in me." He picks up a dagger, tests its point, and then puts it down again, unable to summon the courage to do the deed. Sporus is there for all of it. He watches the man who destroyed his life, the man who was his husband, his master, his captor, fall apart. What must he have been thinking? Is it fear, pity, or perhaps a grim sense of satisfaction, of justice being served? He is still dressed as Sabina, still playing the part of the Empress, even here in this squalid villa with enemy horsemen closing in. When word comes that the soldiers sent by the Senate are approaching, Nero knows his time is up. With the help of his secretary, Epaphroditus, he finally manages to drive a dagger into his throat. He dies on the dirty floor of the villa, a bloody and ignominious end for the man who once ruled the world. His death, in June of 68 AD, marks the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, the family that had ruled Rome since Augustus. But for Sporus, the nightmare is not over. In many ways, it is just beginning. Nero's death leaves him in an incredibly vulnerable position. As one of the most visible and intimate symbols of Nero's hated reign, he is both a valuable prize and a dangerous liability for whoever claims power next. He is a piece of living history, a curiosity, a trophy to be claimed by the victor. What follows is perhaps the most tragic chapter of Sporus's life. He becomes a political pawn, an object to be passed from one powerful man to another, his fate tied to the chaotic civil war that erupts after Nero's death, known as the Year of the Four Emperors. First, he is claimed by the ambitious Praetorian prefect, Nymphidius Sabinus. This is the man who betrayed Nero and helped bring Galba to power. Nymphidius is a man of immense ambition. He sees himself as a potential emperor, and in a twisted imitation of Nero, he takes Sporus for himself. He continues to treat him as a woman, dressing him in the empress's finery and calling him by Poppeia's name, Sabina. He even stages his own marriage to Sporus, a grotesque parody of Nero's wedding. For Nymphidius, possessing Sporus is a way of laying claim to Nero's legacy, of symbolically taking the emperor's place. For Sporus, it is a horrifying continuation of the same abuse, just with a new captor. He has simply been transferred from one owner to another. But Nymphidius's ambitions are short-lived. When he tries to have himself declared emperor before Galba even reaches Rome, his own Praetorian guards turn on him and kill him. Sporus is once again left in a precarious position. For a brief time, he's under the protection of the new emperor, Galba. But Galba is an old, severe, and unpopular ruler. His reign lasts only a few months. In January of 69 AD, another contender for the throne emerges, Marcus Salvius Otho. And here, the story takes another bizarre turn. Otho had been a close friend of Nero's in their youth. In fact, he had been the original husband of Poppaea Sabina. Nero had forced Otho to divorce her so that he could have her for himself, sending him away to govern the distant province of Lusitania, modern-day Portugal. Now, Otho is back in Rome, and he has seized power, having Galba murdered in the Roman Forum. Otho, in an attempt to win the support of the common people and the soldiers who still held a fond memory of Nero's lavish spending, begins to publicly associate himself with the dead emperor. He re-erects Nero's statues. He uses Nero as one of his own names, and, in the most symbolic act of all, he takes possession of Sporus. Once again, Sporus is forced into the role of the imperial wife. Otho, the man who was Poppaea's first husband, now possesses the boy who was forced to become her living replica. The psychological knots of this situation are almost too complex to untangle. Sporus is now the wife of the man whose own wife was stolen by the man who turned him into a woman in the first place. He is a living, breathing symbol of the tangled, incestuous, and violent relationships at the top of the Roman world. You can imagine Sporus's life under Otho. It is the same routine, the same performance. He is still Sabina. He still wears the gowns and the jewels. He still accompanies the emperor to public events. He is still a prisoner, his life dictated by the political needs of his new master. He is a curiosity, a relic of a fallen regime, trotted out to stir up nostalgia for Nero and bolster Otho's legitimacy. But Otho's reign is even shorter than Galba's. The legions stationed on the Rhine frontier have declared their own general, Aulus Vitellius, as emperor. Vitellius marches on Italy, and his forces clash with Otho's army at the Battle of Bedriacum. Otho's army is defeated. Rather than flee or be captured, Otho, in a surprising act of stoic dignity, commits suicide to prevent further civil war. He had ruled for just 3 months. And so, Sporus is passed on to his fourth master in less than a year, the new emperor, Vitellius. Vitellius is known to history as a glutton and a brute, a man of coarse appetites and cruel temperament. His interest in Sporus is not political like Otho's or delusional like Nero's. It is something far more base and degrading. For Vitellius, Sporus is not a symbol or a wife. He is an object for public entertainment. It is under Vitellius that Sporus's long nightmare reaches its ultimate horrifying conclusion. The new emperor, always looking for novel and cruel forms of entertainment for the masses, decides to use Sporus in a public spectacle in the Colosseum or one of its predecessors, as the Flavian amphitheatre was not yet complete. He plans to stage a gladiatorial show that will include a reenactment of a famous mythological scene, the rape of Proserpina. In this grotesque pageant, Sporus would be forced to play the part of the maiden Proserpina, who is abducted and sexually violated by the god Pluto. This is the ultimate degradation. After years of being forced to live as a woman in the privacy of the palace, he is now to be publicly, sexually humiliated in front of thousands of screaming spectators for their amusement. He would be stripped of his fine clothes, his imperial persona, and reduced to a mere object of violent lust in a bloody public show. For Sporus, this represents a final, unbearable breaking point. He has endured castration. He has endured being transformed into a living effigy of a dead woman. He has endured being passed from one powerful man to another like a piece of property. But this public defilement is a horror he cannot face. Faced with this final, absolute humiliation, Sporus makes the only choice that is truly his own, the first and last act of agency he has been allowed in years. Sometime in late 69 AD, before Vitellius's cruel plan can be carried out, Sporus takes his own life. The exact method is not recorded, but it was likely by poison or a hidden dagger. He was probably no more than 20 years old. In death, Sporus finally escapes the grotesque theatre that had consumed his adult life. His suicide is not just an act of despair, it is an act of defiance. It is a final, powerful refusal to be degraded further. It is a reclamation of his own body and his own fate. He could not choose how to live, but he could, and did, choose how to die. He refused to be a character in Vitellius's sick play. He chose to end the story on his own terms. You are left standing in the silence that follows Sporus's final act. The chaotic, bloody stage of the Year of the Four Emperors continues to turn. Vitellius himself would soon be dragged from his hiding place, tortured and killed by the supporters of the final contender, Vespasian, who would go on to found the stable Flavian dynasty. But for Sporus, the play is over. His story, which began in the gilded, suffocating madness of Nero's court, ends in a quiet, desperate act of self-determination. His death, probably in late 69 AD, is a footnote in the grand, violent narrative of Rome's civil war, a minor detail lost in the clash of legions and the rise and fall of emperors. And yet, it is in this final act that Sporus, the boy who was unmade, perhaps finally found himself again. His story becomes a cautionary tale, whispered in the halls of power, and recorded by historians who are all too eager to chronicle the excesses of the fallen Julio-Claudian dynasty. But as you sift through their accounts, you notice something telling. The ancient historians, men like Suetonius, Tacitus, and Cassius Dio, seem less interested in Sporus as a person than as a symbol. To them, he is the ultimate emblem of Nero's decadence, the living proof of how far the emperor had strayed from traditional Roman virtues of gravitas and masculinitas. They write about him with a mixture of clinical fascination and moral condemnation. He is Exhibit A in their prosecution of a failed emperor. They detail the castration, the wedding, the public appearances, all as evidence of Nero's insanity, his impiety, his break from Roman tradition. What is hauntingly absent from these accounts is any real sense of Sporus's humanity. What were his thoughts, his fears, his dreams? What was the name of the boy before Nero erased it? We know almost nothing about who he was before his transformation. What were his hopes? Did he have a family, a mother, a father, siblings, who were forced to stand by silently as their son was stolen from them and remade into a public spectacle? All of that is lost, erased by the shadow of the imperial narrative. He is a supporting character in Nero's tragedy, his inner life deemed irrelevant by historians focused on the grand sweep of political events. His story is told, but his voice is silent. This is where your journey takes you now, into the quiet spaces between the historical facts, into the realm of empathy. You try to piece together the fragments of his existence, to look beyond the symbol and see the boy. You think about the resilience it must have taken to survive for as long as he did, to endure the initial trauma of the surgery, the daily psychological torment of his RE education, the constant fear of displeasing a volatile, violent master, to navigate the treacherous currents of the imperial court, where a wrong word could mean death, to maintain a flawless performance for years under the scrutiny of thousands of eyes. This was not weakness, it was a testament to an incredible, if tragic, strength. You consider the mainstream historical fact that is woven into his story, the year of the 4 emperors. Sporus's fate was directly tied to this chaotic period of civil war. His transfer from Nymphidius Sabinus to Otho and finally to Vitellius illustrates how individuals, even those in the imperial circle, could become human currency, their lives and bodies treated as spoils of war. His story is a microcosm of the instability that gripped the empire when the central authority of the Julio-Claudian dynasty collapsed. He was a living relic of a defeated regime, and like a statue or a palace, he was passed from one victor to the next. Then you stumble upon a quirky or fringe tidbit, a detail that adds another layer of strangeness to the tale. Some later, less reliable sources, part of the Historia Augusta, suggest that when Otho took possession of Sporus, he genuinely fell for him. These accounts claim that Otho, who had once been married to the real Poppaea, found a strange comfort in her living replica and treated Sporus with a degree of affection that went beyond mere political calculation. While most mainstream historians dismiss this as romantic embellishment, it presents a fascinating, if unsettling, possibility. Could Sporus have found a brief, bizarre moment of relative kindness in the arms of his third master, the man who had been his wife's first husband? It's a strange, tangled thought, a testament to the complex and often contradictory nature of human relationships, even in the most extreme circumstances. And, of course, you encounter the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Sporus's story should be viewed primarily as a tale of gender transformation or as one of slavery and abuse. Some modern interpretations focus on the gender aspects, seeing Sporus as a figure who was forced to live as a woman, a proto-transgender figure in a deeply unaccepting world. Others argue that this focus is anachronistic and that the core of the story is about power and slavery. In this view, Sporus's gender was secondary to his status as a freedman, a person with no legal autonomy whose body could be altered and used in any way his master saw fit. The truth, you suspect, lies in the complex intersection of both. He was a victim of absolute power, and that power expressed itself through the violent and total subjugation of his body and his gender identity. You reflect on the nature of his final choice. His suicide was both a tragedy and his only victory. It was a final, desperate act of defiance, a refusal to be the plaything in Vitellius's bloody circus. In that last moment, he reclaimed the one thing that had been denied to him throughout his ordeal, the power to make a choice about his own fate. He asserted his will over his own body in the only way left to him. It's a chilling thought that the ultimate act of self-possession was self-destruction. It suggests that somewhere, buried deep beneath the layers of silk, makeup and forced femininity, beneath the persona of Sabina, a spark of the original Sporus, the boy who once was, survived. That spark chose oblivion over further degradation. His story echoes through the centuries, a haunting reminder of the human cost of absolute power. It's a story about identity and how fragile it can be, how it can be bent, broken, and even erased by the will of another. Nero, in his grief-fueled madness, sought to resurrect his dead wife by destroying a living boy. He tried to cheat death by inflicting a kind of living death on someone else. He failed. He could replicate Poppeia's appearance, but he could not replicate her soul. All he created was a beautiful, tragic puppet, whose silence and melancholy were a constant, reproachful testament to the crime he had committed. You think back to the callbacks of this journey. Remember that obsessive love Nero had for Poppaea? It wasn't love. It was a desire for ownership, a pathology that led directly to her death and Sporus's torment. Remember the lessons in deportment, the voice coaching, the endless hours with hairdressers? That was the machinery of his unmaking, the systematic process of dismantling a human being. And remember the final cruel plan of Vitellius? That was the moment the illusion shattered, when Sporus was to be reduced from a tragic empress back to a mere object, a piece of flesh for public consumption. It was the one indignity he would not, could not endure. The story of Sporus is not just a curiosity from ancient Rome. It is a profound and disturbing exploration of what it means to be human. It asks us questions that are still relevant today. What is identity? Is it our body, our name, our memories? Or is it something deeper, something that can survive even when all the external markers are stripped away? Sporus's story suggests that this core self, this essential spark of humanity, can endure unimaginable abuse, and that even in the most powerless of circumstances, it can find a way to make its presence known, even if only in a final, tragic act of self-annihilation. His legacy is one of silence, of a life lived in the shadow of another's obsession. We will never know his true thoughts, We will never hear his story in his own words. We can only look at the horrifying outline left by history and try to imagine the suffering and the resilience of the person who was forced to live it. He is a ghost at the imperial banquet, a silent testament to the fact that behind every grand narrative of empire, of power, of history, there are individual human stories of pain, survival, and quiet defiance. And these stories, even when they are fragmented and incomplete, deserve to be remembered. They remind us of the humanity that can be found in the darkest corners of the past, and the terrible price that is often paid when one person has the power to remake another in their own twisted image. The boy who was forced to become an empress, who endured years of unimaginable psychological and physical abuse, who was passed from one ruler to another like a trophy, and who finally chose death over a final humiliation, deserves to be remembered not just as a symbol of imperial decadence, but as a human being who fought, in his own quiet way, to the very end. And so, the story of Sporus fades back into the mists of time, leaving behind a quiet chill and a profound sense of sorrow. The echoes of the grand, terrible theatre of imperial Rome grow faint, and the figures of Nero, Poppaea, and the boy who was forced to become her shadow recede into the pages of history from which they came. The journey you have taken was not one of battles or of empires rising and falling in the grand sense, but a much more intimate and unsettling exploration of a single stolen life. The weight of his story, the sheer scale of the cruelty inflicted upon him, can feel heavy, but as the narrative softens, you can let that weight begin to lift, replaced by a quiet contemplation of the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of its attempted erasure. The frantic, paranoid energy of Nero's court gives way now to a deeper, more lasting peace. The sharp edges of the tragedy begin to blur, softened by the vast distance of 2,000 years. What remains is not the horror, but a quiet, enduring empathy for the boy whose name we barely know, but whose fate has now been shared. Let the silence that follows his story be a space for rest, a gentle buffer between the turbulent past and the calm of the present moment. The shadows of ancient Rome are long, but they cannot reach you here. You are safe in the quiet of your own room, drifting now on the gentle currents of approaching sleep, leaving the ghosts of the past to their eternal rest. The final image is not one of violence or despair, but of a single, quiet choice for freedom, a final, whispered act of defiance that has echoed through millennia to find you here, tonight, as you finally let go and drift away.